The sky was gray the day I stood on that porch again. Not storm gray, just dull, heavy, like the world knew what was about to happen and decided not to put on a show. I had the deed in one hand, the keys in the other. And the house, the same one that once locked me out, stood quiet, unchanged. A few more cracks in the paint, a rusted mailbox that hadn't seen care in years. But it was still the same place. Same door I'd stood behind at 17, suitcase at my feet, while my stepfather stared at me like I was something he meant to discard. "You're not my real daughter," he'd said. Just like that. Like it was fact. Like it explained everything. No anger in his voice, no shame either. Just cold detachment, the kind you reserve for taking out the trash. I remember the silence after more than I remember the words. My mother stood behind him, arms folded, mouth a straight line. She didn't say it, but she didn't stop him either. The screen door creaked shut behind me. I took one last look at the walls that watched me grow up, the staircase I used to slide down on Christmas mornings, the kitchen table where I once learned how to balance a checkbook. Then I walked away. No car, no plan, just a half-packed duffel, a 20 in my back pocket, and a heart that had already learned how to stop hoping. 10 years later, I stood in the exact same spot. Except now, the title was in my name. He didn't know yet, not officially. I hadn't announced it, hadn't gloated or posted or made a scene. That wasn't my style. I just waited. Quiet, measured, patient. Because some victories aren't about celebration. They're about symmetry. And I had waited a decade for this moment to come full circle. The house that rejected me now answered to me. And I wasn't here to make noise. I was here to turn the key. I used to think silence was safety. When I was a kid, quiet meant the house was stable. No shouting, no slammed doors, just soft footsteps and the low murmur of TV from the living room. But eventually, I learned that silence can be just as sharp as words, especially in the hands of a man who never wanted you there in the first place. My mother married him when I was 8. I remember the wedding. Small, courthouse. Her in a powder blue dress she kept pulling at because the waist was too tight. He didn't smile much, said he wasn't big on pictures. I remember thinking he smelled like mint and aftershave, and that his handshake when we first met felt more like a contract than a welcome. He never hit me, never raised his voice. That would have been too easy to explain. What he did was smaller, meaner. He ignored my birthday the first year, said he thought Mom was taking care of it. He forgot to bring me back souvenirs from their weekend trips. Gave his niece the bigger Christmas gift, even though we were the same age. Said it was just what he happened to pick up. Little things. So small you almost feel petty for noticing. But kids notice. It was in the way he'd introduce me to his friends. This is her daughter. Never our daughter. Never my anything. I used to stand at the top of the stairs, listening. Waiting for him to say my name the way he said his son's. Like it belonged to someone important. He never did. When I turned 12, I asked if I could call him Dad. Just once. I wasn't trying to push anything. I just thought maybe after 4 years, we'd turned a corner. He looked at me like I'd stepped out of line. "You have a dad already," he said. "Somewhere." That was the first time I felt something close to shame over who I was, over what I lacked. My real father had left before I was old enough to remember. All I had was this man who shared a mortgage with my mother and a last name I hadn't been given. And every day, he made it clear. I was a guest, an obligation, a shadow he didn't ask for. So I learned not to ask for much. I kept my room clean. I ate dinner quietly. I said thank you even when the gift was hollow. I thought if I just behaved well enough, long enough, something would shift. But some people don't warm up. They just wait for an excuse to push you out. And he'd been waiting for years. It was the spring before I graduated high school when everything finally cracked. I had a letter in my hand, an acceptance to a small college upstate, nothing flashy, but enough to matter. It came with a partial scholarship and a promise. If I could just cover the rest, the door was open. I waited until dinner to bring it up. Sat at the table, napkin in my lap, words rehearsed like a speech. My mother was slicing chicken. He was on his second beer, barely looking up. I got in, I said, and there's a grant. I just need help with the other part, just the first semester. After that, I'll work. I'll figure it out. My mother smiled, soft and distracted. That's wonderful, baby. Isn't that wonderful? He didn't even blink, just chewed, swallowed, set his fork down like he was tired of the whole thing already. And what does that have to do with me? The room chilled. I thought maybe he'd misheard. I just meant maybe you could help with the tuition. Alone, maybe. Until I get settled. He leaned back, eyes cold and clear. Why would I pay for a kid that isn't mine? My mother didn't speak, didn't flinch. She just looked down at her plate like the words hadn't landed in the room at all. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I sat there, heat rising to my face, heart pounding in a way I couldn't control. He stood up, took his plate to the sink, turned on the faucet. Your real father should have thought of that, he added, like it was a fact, not a wound. That night, I packed quietly. Not everything, just what I needed. A duffel bag, some clothes, a few notebooks, my acceptance letter, folded twice, tucked into the side pocket like a lifeline. My mother knocked once as I zipped the bag. She didn't say she disagreed, didn't offer help, just said, "You don't have to do this right now." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized she wasn't going to fight for me. She never had. I left before sunrise. No screaming, no tears, just a quiet exit, like a tenant leaving early. I had nowhere to go. Not really. No job lined up, no money except for a couple of bills and loose change. But I had something else, resolve. A bone-deep kind of clarity that shows up when you finally stop asking to be chosen. He'd made it simple. I wasn't his daughter. And now, I wasn't his problem. I spent my first night in the backseat of a friend's car. She was kind enough to offer it. Said she'd leave the back window cracked and a blanket in the trunk. I thanked her more times than I should have. She didn't ask questions, just handed me the keys and said, "Call me if you need anything." I didn't. That car was old, the kind with worn leather seats and a stubborn radio that buzzed even when it was off. I curled into myself and listened to the quiet buzz until sleep came in fits. By morning, my legs were stiff and my throat dry. I walked 2 blocks to a public library just to wash my face and brush my teeth in the bathroom. The mirror was cracked. The light above it flickered. I looked like a stranger. No one tells you how fast dignity becomes a luxury. When you don't have a place to go, every small task turns into a calculation. Where to change, where to charge your phone, where to look like you still belong somewhere. I ate whatever was cheap. Ramen, dollar menu fries, gas station granola bars. I counted coins before every purchase. Every dollar that left my pocket felt like it might be the last. It wasn't dramatic, it was just survival. Quiet, invisible, daily. I told people I was between places. Let them believe I had a plan. The truth was, I was just trying to make it to the next week without falling apart. Eventually, I found a room to rent in a woman's basement. A mattress on the floor, no windows, mildew in the corners. But it had a lock. And after nights spent in borrowed cars and 24-hour diners, that lock felt like gold. Rent was cheap, but not cheap enough to float on hope. So I worked. Anything that paid. Waitressed at a diner with sticky floors and graveyard shifts. Picked up hours at a dollar store restocking shelves. Babysat during weekends for a woman who never learned my name. I lived in exhaustion. Every morning was a negotiation with my body. Just a little longer, just a little farther, but I kept going. Because there was no other option. No one was coming to rescue me. Not my mother, not the man who kicked me out, not the father who vanished before memory. All I had was myself, and the unspoken promise I'd made the day I left that house. This wouldn't be the end of me. Some nights I'd lie awake and stare at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster and whispering the same thing over and over. I'm still here. I don't know when those words became power, but eventually they stopped sounding like survival and started feeling like the beginning of something bigger. I didn't keep a calendar back then. Days didn't need names. They were just blocks of time, hours to fill, meals to skip, shifts to chase. I woke up before sunrise, went to bed long after midnight, and somewhere in between, I earned just enough to stay breathing. My life became a rotation of uniforms. Black apron for the diner, polo shirt for the dollar store, worn sneakers for babysitting gigs. I kept them folded in the back seat of my car, changed in public bathrooms, layered deodorant like armor. Nobody ever asked how I was doing. That was a gift. At the diner, I learned how to keep coffee fresh and customers moving. I learned that people tip better when you smile like their problems matter. I learned to recognize loneliness in the way someone lingers over a second refill. But mostly, I learned how to disappear into usefulness. At the dollar store, I memorized shelf layouts and barcodes. I restocked toilet paper and sorted expired candy without thinking. It was numbing in a way that helped. My body worked, my mind went quiet. That was enough. Babysitting was the strangest one. I spent hours watching cartoons I didn't understand, answering toddler questions I couldn't explain, and reading bedtime stories with voices I didn't know I had. The kids were loud, chaotic, but they liked me, trusted me. Sometimes one of them would reach for my hand without asking. That made the silence inside me feel a little less wide. I worked like that for months. No breaks, no splurges. Every dollar was accounted for. I kept receipts in a shoebox under my bed, logged every tip in a notebook with shaky handwriting. Rent, food, bus fare, anything extra went into a savings jar hidden behind a stack of books. Coins first, then small bills, folded tight. That jar was more than money. It was proof I still had direction. Some nights, I'd count it before bed. Not because I needed to, but because I liked the sound. The soft shuffle of paper, the clink of change. It was the sound of momentum, of something, anything moving forward. I didn't talk much to anyone. Just smiled when I had to. Nodded politely. I wasn't angry. I was focused. And focus doesn't leave room for rage. People say time flies when you're busy, but that's not true. Time slows down when you're exhausted. It stretches out like an endless hallway you have to walk blindfolded. But I kept walking. One step, one shift, $1 at a time. And even when it felt like the world was built to forget me, I kept a single thought close to my chest, pressed between every bill I saved. One day, I'll come back different, and no one will see it coming. The first thing I did after settling into a rhythm was delete their numbers. No warning, no final message, just a clean swipe, gone from my phone like they'd never existed. My mother. Him. Both erased within seconds. It wasn't about anger, it was about preservation. Every time I saw their names flash across my screen, even when they didn't call, it triggered something. A dull ache, a hollow space that begged for answers I knew I'd never get. So I cut the cord. Quiet. Final. The silence that followed was louder than I expected. At first, I checked my inbox, not because I hoped they'd reach out, just to confirm they hadn't. Every empty day became its own answer. They weren't wondering where I was. They weren't asking if I'd eaten. They weren't losing sleep. I was the one who'd been thrown out, but somehow I was also the one erased. Fine. I stopped checking after a while. Stopped imagining the conversations they weren't having about me. I let the silence stretch until it no longer felt like punishment. I focused on the now. Rent paid on time. Shoes with no holes. Enough food in the fridge that I could choose what to eat instead of settling for what was left. That kind of luxury still felt strange. Like something borrowed. I started taking walks again. Just a few blocks at first. Then farther. I'd wander through neighborhoods where houses looked like the ones in magazines. Neat hedges. Wind chimes on porches. Mailboxes with real names painted on them. I used to wonder what it felt like to come home to something that wanted you there. I didn't let myself envy it. I just took mental notes. Observed the kind of life I wanted to build. I'd see girls my age walking dogs, sipping coffee, laughing into their phones. And sometimes I'd feel the edge of a question creep in. Why them? Not me? But then I'd remember. They hadn't walked away from a house that made them feel like a burden. They hadn't worked 16-hour shifts just to stay visible. I had. And every day I kept going, I put more space between me and the girl who stood on that porch with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. My mother didn't call, not for holidays, not for birthdays, not even when someone from our old church passed away and I saw the obituary online. Her silence became its own kind of truth. She chose him. And now, I was choosing myself. That decision didn't come with fireworks. It came with breath, with stillness, with the steady understanding that I could live a whole life without ever hearing from them again. And if they thought I'd come crawling back, begging for scraps of care, they never really knew me at all. I got the scholarship on a Thursday. A typed letter signed at the bottom in ink that smudged just enough to feel real. I stood in the post office parking lot, reading it 3 times before I let myself believe it. Full tuition, small stipend, a new beginning wrapped in official language and stamped with approval. I didn't cry. I just sat on the curb, letter in my lap, the wind lifting the edge of the envelope like it was trying to carry it away. For the first time in years, the horizon stretched wide enough to hold me. The school was 2 states over. A city I'd never been to, where nobody knew my name or what I'd survived. I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases, tossed the rest, and boarded a bus that smelled like old leather and coffee. 12 hours later, I stepped off into a place that didn't look like survival. It looked like opportunity. Classes were hard at first. I hadn't been in a real academic setting in years, but work ethic doesn't forget. I sat in the front row, asked questions, took notes like my life depended on them. Because it did. I wasn't there for the experience. I was there to build something permanent. I took on freelance work between semesters, event planning, admin help, temp contracts, anything that paid and taught me something useful. I learned how to write invoices, how to negotiate terms without flinching, how to speak like someone who belonged in the room. By my final year, I had clients who referred me without hesitation. Word spread. My name started showing up in inboxes I hadn't reached out to. When I graduated, I didn't look for a job. I built one. An independent consulting business. Small at first. Just me, a laptop, and a logo I made late one night with free software and too much caffeine. But it grew. Slowly, quietly. Clients returned. Budgets increased. I filed paperwork, opened an LLC, got a P.O. box and a separate business account. Every move intentional. Every choice a brick in the foundation. I stayed low. Focused. Said no more than I said yes. I wasn't chasing applause. I was chasing control. In 5 years, I went from sleeping in the back seat of a car to signing contracts in glass offices, and I never posted about it. Never sent updates to anyone from my past. Not even the friends who meant well but disappeared when my life got too heavy. It wasn't bitterness, it was discipline. The old me wanted to prove people wrong. The new me didn't care if they were watching. Because success, when earned in silence, echoes the loudest. And mine was just getting started. It started like any other project. A corporate client wanted help staging a property before a high-profile sale. Nothing complicated, just presentation consulting, cost analysis, market research. I'd done it a dozen times. I took the call while standing in line at the bank, scribbled down the address on the back of a receipt, and didn't think twice. Later that night, I typed it into my laptop. At first, the street name didn't register. The photos loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, until the front porch came into view. That porch. I stared at the screen, breath caught somewhere between memory and disbelief. There it was. The cracked steps, the leaning mailbox, the faded blue trim. 10 years hadn't changed much. Maybe a new coat of paint on the shutters, but the bones were the same, familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. I double-checked the address. It was real. The house was for sale. And not just for sale, priced under market value. Motivated seller. Foreclosure likely. I clicked through the listing again, this time slower. The date it was posted, the agency name, the line that said, "All offers considered." I closed the tab, sat back. The air around me felt too still. I hadn't thought about that house in years, not with any real weight. I'd moved on, carved out a life so far from that past it felt fictional. But there it was, sitting on the market like an invitation I hadn't asked for. I slept on it, woke up at 4 a.m., heart pounding, and opened the listing again. My hand hovered over the contact form. This wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about alignment, the quiet, deliberate kind. A full circle moment that wasn't born of rage, but of readiness. I called a real estate lawyer the next morning, told her I wanted to make an offer anonymously through an LLC. I gave her the numbers, wired the earnest deposit, and let her handle the rest. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my assistant, not even the client who gave me the lead. It wasn't secrecy, it was focus. 2 weeks later, I got the call, offer accepted, closing scheduled, keys ready for pickup. I hung up and stared out the window, city lights flickering like echoes of all the nights I'd walked alone, whispering promises to myself about a future that felt impossible. Now, that future held a deed. And the house that once kicked me out, it was mine. Not as a trophy, as a statement, not everything. Broken stays that way. The closing office was colder than I expected. Neutral tones, soft-spoken receptionist, a stack of documents already waiting when I arrived, each one labeled with color-coded tabs. I didn't flinch, just sat down, pen in hand, and signed every page with quiet precision. The LLC kept my name off the record, a buffer of professionalism, no room for sentiment, just numbers, legal language, and a transaction that marked the end of one era and the start of something entirely mine. When it was done, the agent slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were the keys, 2, brass and plain, and a photocopy of the signed deed. "You're all set," he said, like it was any other property transfer, like I hadn't just reclaimed the very ground I was once forced to leave. I nodded, thanked him, and walked out into the sun. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, not in weight, but in memory. I didn't open it again, just held it on my lap during the drive, fingers curled around the edges. The house was empty when I arrived, vacant, echoing. I stood on the porch for a moment before unlocking the door, the same creak, the same sticking hinge. I stepped inside slowly, each footfall soft against worn floors that remembered too much. The living room was smaller than I remembered. The kitchen still smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The walls were bare, but not silent. They whispered old arguments, quiet dinners, nights I used to count the minutes until morning. I moved through each room with careful steps, not to avoid noise, but to take it all in. The back bedroom still had the faded outline of where my bed once stood. A slight discoloration in the carpet, a mark I never noticed before, shaped like something leaning against the wall, maybe a poster or a bookshelf. I knelt down and ran my fingers over it. A decade of distance. And still, this place knew me. But this time, it didn't own me. I walked through every hallway, turned on every light, opened every window. The air was stale, but it would clear. I could feel it. There was something different in the way the light fell across the floorboards now. I made no plans that day. No immediate renovations. No dramatic changes. I just stood in what used to be his kitchen, placed the envelope on the counter, and opened the window above the sink. Let the breeze come in. Let the house breathe again. And with it, I did too. Because I hadn't just bought a house. I'd rewritten the story, and this time I held the pen. I came back the next morning, alone. No contractors, no clipboard, no measuring tape, just me and the keys in my pocket. Still warm from my grip. I didn't bring a camera. I wasn't interested in documenting anything. I just needed to feel the space with no one else watching. The floor creaked in the same places it always had. The second step on the staircase still groaned under pressure. A sound that once meant someone was coming to check on me, or more often, to remind me of what I'd done wrong. I pressed my foot against it deliberately this time. Let it complain. Let it remember I wasn't a child anymore. I moved slowly, room to room. The living room was bare, just shadows of where furniture used to be. I imagined the old recliner, the television angled just slightly wrong, the coffee table with a chipped leg that no one ever fixed. I could still see him there, feet propped up, remote in hand, talking at the news like it owed him something. I let that image come, then let it pass. The kitchen was cleaner than I expected. Empty, but clean. As if someone had wiped away the mess without really scrubbing the history. I opened drawers, ran my hand along the countertop, found a faint scratch by the sink. One I remembered making with a can opener the night I learned to cook my own dinner. The bedroom that used to be mine stopped me cold. It looked smaller now. Or maybe I'd just outgrown it in ways no measuring tape could capture. The closet door still stuck halfway through the track. The window still faced the neighbor's fence. I walked in slowly, taking in the echoes. There were no ghosts, just dust. But the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't sharp, it was mine. I stood in the center of the room, letting the weight of memory settle, then dissolve. The girl who once cried herself to sleep here was gone. In her place stood someone who had survived the storm and returned, not to relive it, but to claim it. Not out of sentiment, out of sovereignty. I reached into my bag, pulled out a blank notebook, and placed it gently on the floor. No message, no ritual, just a placeholder, a signal to myself that this space no longer held me hostage. This room would become something else, not restored, rewritten. I closed the door behind me and walked back, down the stairs. No photos, no posts, just quiet ownership. Because real power doesn't need applause. It just needs a key. It happened the following week. Early afternoon, a sky so blue it almost felt staged. I was upstairs in the front bedroom peeling wallpaper when I heard it. The knock. Not frantic, not soft, just 3 firm taps. I froze. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Some instincts never fade. I wiped my hands on my jeans and moved to the top of the stairs, heart steady, step slow. From the window, I could see the top of his head, the same graying hair, the same stance, one hand in his pocket, the other holding something I couldn't see from that angle. I didn't speak. I just opened the door. His face didn't register me at first. His eyes were fixed somewhere behind me, like he was scanning the house for someone else. Then they landed on mine. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then his mouth opened, but no words came. I didn't fill the silence. I let it sit between us, thick and weighted. Let him swim in the confusion. He looked down, then back up. Is this your place? He asked, voice thinner than I remembered. I nodded once. His eyes darted around, taking in the porch, the fresh locks, the hint of paint supplies visible through the open door. I didn't see your name on the listing, he said slowly, as if still trying to put the pieces together. You weren't supposed to, I replied, calm. His jaw twitched. I thought the bank had it, thought they were dealing with investors. I said nothing. He shifted his stance, suddenly unsure of how to stand on wood he used to own, or thought he did. I came to get the rest of my stuff, he said finally. Just a few things in the garage. Tools. My toolbox. I looked past him toward the driveway. No truck, no boxes, no bags. He hadn't brought anything to carry it with. He hadn't expected this. I cleared the garage, I said. Everything left behind was considered abandoned by the previous owner. His mouth opened again, closed. You didn't think I'd come back, I said, not as a question. He swallowed, looked away. Wasn't personal, you know. Things were complicated back then. They were simple, I corrected. You made them simple. For a second, he looked like he wanted to fight that. Like he was gearing up for a speech, an excuse, a rewrite of history. But he didn't. He just stepped back. I watched him from the doorway, still holding the knob. He wasn't the man who'd once stood tall in this house. He was smaller now. Or maybe I was just standing taller. He took another step back, nodded once, and turned to leave. I didn't watch him walk down the sidewalk. I just closed the door. Soft, final, and this time I was the one on the inside. He came back the next day. This time he rang the bell, brought a folding chair from the trunk of his car and set it on the lawn like he was camping out. Sat there, arms crossed, like he expected me to join him for a heart-to-heart. I didn't. I let him wait. 30 minutes passed before I stepped outside, hands clean, expression blank. He stood when he saw me, brushing crumbs from his shirt. The sandwich wrapper lay on the chair behind him. I thought maybe we could talk, he said. I stayed quiet. He cleared his throat. Look, I know things weren't ideal back then. Still, I said nothing. He tried a different tone. Something softer, almost practiced. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just did what I thought was best at the time. You weren't my blood and things were tense. Your mom and I, we had different views. She didn't stop you, I said evenly. He nodded slowly. She didn't. The silence after that stretched. He shuffled his feet. I didn't expect you to end up with this place, he admitted. Figured the bank would take it. I didn't have the money to save it, not after... He stopped himself, then waved vaguely at the house. I didn't come here to fight, he added quickly. It's hard, you know? Seeing it in someone else's hands. Knowing what it used to be. What it used to be, I repeated. The words landed flat. He looked down at his shoes. It wasn't all bad. I raised an eyebrow. He met my eyes. You were a good kid, always were. Quiet, smart. I just didn't know how to fit you in. I let that sit for a moment. Let him hear the echo of what he'd just said. That's not an apology, I said. I know. Then why are you here? He hesitated. Because it's yours now, and I didn't think it would be. And maybe I need to understand how that happened. I crossed my arms. You told me I wasn't your daughter. You made that choice. You kicked me out like I was clutter, like I didn't belong. I was wrong, he said. I see that now. That's not enough. He didn't argue. We stood there, two people with nothing left to bridge the gap. Not blood, not memory, not even grief. He opened his mouth once more, then stopped. I won't come back, he said. I just needed to see it. I nodded, not in forgiveness, just in acknowledgement. He folded the chair slowly, returned it to the trunk. Then he got in the car and drove away. No wave, no second glance, just gone. I stood on the porch for a long time after that, letting the quiet settle. Not every ending needs closure. Sometimes it just needs a locked door. He called once after that. Blocked number. I let it ring. Then the letter came. Handwritten, uneven, like he'd started over more than once. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Just my name written across the front in slanted print. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for 3 days, unopened, nestled between a paint sample booklet and a receipt from the hardware store. Every time I passed it, I wondered if it was an apology, if it would be an attempt to rewrite history with softer words. On the 4th morning, I opened it. No dear, no love, just his thoughts, scattered and defensive. He said he was under pressure back then, that he was trying to hold the house together, that he never asked to raise someone else's kid, that my mother should have done more, that I didn't make it easy. And then, in the middle of it, a line that stopped me cold. You always acted like you were better than us. It sat there, buried in a paragraph, but sharp enough to cut. That was the core of it. The truth behind the years of distance, the quiet rejections, the cold indifference. I wasn't unwanted because I failed. I was unwanted because I refused to fold, because I didn't beg, because I didn't let their silence define me. I set the letter down and exhaled. This wasn't regret. It was resentment dressed in nostalgia. He didn't see me as someone he'd wronged. He saw me as someone who escaped. And for people like him, that's the bigger crime. I didn't respond. I didn't shred the letter either. I placed it in a box at the back of the closet, beneath some old tax records and spare keys. Not as a keepsake, as a record. One more artifact of who he chose to be when it mattered most. That same week, the realtor emailed to confirm the county had updated the public record. The house was now listed under the LLC. No contest, no lien. Fully mine. I stood in the front yard that evening, hose in hand, watering a patch of grass that barely held on through years of neglect. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the porch. A couple of neighborhood kids zipped past on bikes, laughing. I nodded to them. They didn't know what this house had been. They didn't need to. To them, it was just another place on the block, a woman fixing up a fixer-upper. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Because redemption doesn't always come in fire and noise. Sometimes it's slow, deliberate. A steady reclaiming of every inch you were told didn't belong to you. The day he came to collect the last of his things, it rained. A soft, steady drizzle that made the driveway slick and the air thick with the smell of wet earth. I hadn't heard from him again since the letter, but that morning I found a message slipped under the door. It said he'd be by around noon. Just a few things, he promised. A box or two he left behind in the attic. Tools, maybe some old clothes. He asked for 10 minutes. I gave him 15. I waited on the porch, umbrella in hand, keys in my pocket. He arrived right on time. Same rusted sedan, same worn jacket he used to wear on Sunday errands. He didn't look at me when he stepped out, just nodded and moved quickly toward the side entrance. I didn't follow. I just listened to the familiar creaks of floorboards, the muffled thump of boxes being dragged, the low mutter of a man moving through what used to be his kingdom. I thought I might feel something. Anger. Triumph. Pity. But all I felt was distance. 10 minutes later, he came back out. One box in his arms, light enough to carry with ease. He didn't say goodbye, didn't ask for anything more. Just walked past me, shoulders hunched, shoes slipping slightly on the wet concrete. As he reached his car, he paused. Box already in the back seat, door half open. Then he turned. "I didn't think you'd turn out like this," he said. I didn't ask what he meant. He waited, maybe expecting a response, a thank you, an apology, a piece of me to give back. I gave him nothing. He got in the car and drove off. No horn, no wave, just gone. I watched until his taillights faded behind the mist, the sound of his engine swallowed by the steady hum of rain. When I went back inside, the house felt lighter, not empty, clear. I moved from room to room slowly, wiping down doorknobs, sweeping dust, into quiet piles. The attic was empty now, every trace of him removed, every ghost of his presence packed and driven away. It was the first time the house felt mine, not just on paper, but in presence. I brewed tea in the kitchen, barefoot on clean tile, the soft clink of the spoon against ceramic grounding me. No tension, no anticipation, no lingering noise in my chest. Just peace. He was gone, and I wasn't waiting for his return. Because there was nothing left here for him, nothing left here for me to prove. The exit was clean, not because he made it that way, but because I did. The first thing I replaced was the front door, not because it was broken. It worked fine, but it had a sound I remembered too well. A sharp click when it closed, a creak when it swung open late at night. It was the sound of fear, of punishment, of waiting to be told I didn't belong, so I measured it. Took it off the hinges myself, hauled it down to the curb. The new one was heavier, mahogany, solid, no cracks, no drafts. I had it painted a deep, quiet blue, something calm, something sure. I installed the knob and locked myself, made sure it closed with a soft, deliberate sound. That door would never slam again, not in anger, not in exile. The next change was the room that used to be mine. I stripped the old wallpaper, tore up the stained carpet, scrubbed every inch of the closet until it stopped smelling like dust and old regret. I painted the walls a soft cream and filled the room with shelves, floor to ceiling. I bought a second-hand armchair, reupholstered it in charcoal gray, and placed it under the window. That room became a library, not big, not fancy, but quiet, intentional, lined with everything I never had space for before. Books, journals, ideas. A room for thinking, for breathing, for reclaiming silence on my terms. Other changes followed. New curtains, new fixtures. I planted lavender outside the back door, where weeds used to choke the walkway. Repaired the cracked tile in the bathroom. Replaced the mirror in the hallway, the one that used to reflect his shadow more than mine. Each fix felt like an exhale, not an erasure, a restoration. I wasn't trying to forget what happened in this house. I was reshaping it, taking the raw edges and sanding them down into something livable. I didn't rush the process. Some days, I did nothing but sit on the back steps and watch the sky change. Other days, I worked until my hands ached, hammering nails into new baseboards, brushing paint across drywall like it could rewrite memory. And maybe, in a way, it did. Every corner I touched reminded me that I had come back not to haunt this place, but to heal it, to make it mine in every way it had once refused me. And as the day stretched out, quiet and full of purpose, I realized something simple and unshakable. I was no longer trying to fix what they broke. I was building something that had never existed before, and I was doing it alone. Not because I had to, but because I could. I framed the deed and hung it in the hallway, not in the entryway, not in the living room, just there, quiet, unannounced, where I'd see it every morning when I passed from bedroom to kitchen. It wasn't for guests. It wasn't for show. It was for me. A single sheet of paper, cream-colored, signed and sealed. My name printed clearly at the top. No hyphen, no shared ownership, no conditions, just mine. I stood in front of it longer than I meant to that first morning. Coffee cooling in my hand, sunlight creeping in through the east-facing windows. The hallway was still half-painted.
I hadn't chosen the final color yet. But the deed didn't need the right wall to feel whole. It spoke for itself. The same hallway I used to sneak through as a teenager, avoiding his footsteps, ducking under his disapproval, now bore my signature. That contrast wasn't loud. It was permanent. And in its quiet permanence, it reminded me who I had become. Later that week, I boxed up the last of the paperwork, the closing documents, the renovation invoices, the business receipts that made the purchase possible, and filed them neatly in a cabinet, all of it indexed, all of it secure. I labeled the folder simply House Completed, because that's what it felt like. Not a beginning, not a reclamation, completion. There would always be echoes in the walls. I didn't expect otherwise. Certain footsteps would always sound familiar. Certain corners would always flicker with the memory of tension. But now, those echoes answered to me. I made tea that evening and walked through the house slowly. Floorboards newly sealed, shelves half full, a stack of unopened mail on the table, none of it demanding more than a glance. In the kitchen, the window above the sink was open. A breeze came through, rustling the curtain. The sound was soft, a kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. I looked down at the counter, then at the worn spot where his elbows used to rest while he lectured about responsibility, about respect, about roles. He had his definitions. I had rewritten mine. I reached up and turned off the light, let the house settle in its stillness. No voices raised, no doors slammed, just the quiet hum of a home finally in balance. And that framed deed on the wall? It wasn't a symbol of revenge. It was proof of endurance. A signature that outlived every dismissal, every silence, every "you don't belong." A few weeks later, I was on the front lawn, pruning the small hedges that had gone wild during years of neglect, when a woman walking her dog paused at the edge of the sidewalk. She looked to be in her 60s, friendly face, wearing a sweater too warm for the weather. Her golden retriever tugged gently at the leash, nose pressed to the grass. "New to the neighborhood?" she asked. I glanced up, shearing scissors still in hand. "Sort of," she smiled. "This place has been quiet for years. Heard it finally sold. Hard to keep up with who's coming and going these days." I nodded politely. "Well," she said, glancing at the porch, "whoever bought it must have gotten a good deal. It's a strong house. Always had good bones." I looked back at the house, its clean lines, the new front door, the lavender blooming by the steps. The structure hadn't changed much, but it wasn't the same place. "It's mine now," I said. She raised her eyebrows, then smiled again. "Well, welcome home." She didn't ask who lived here before, didn't pry, just waved and continued down the sidewalk, her dog trotting ahead, leash swaying gently between them. I watched her go, then turned back to the hedge, trimming slowly, each clip steady and clean. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and damp earth. Birds moved through the trees. A car passed on the street behind me, and in that moment, I felt it. Not pride, not vindication, presence. I wasn't revisiting this place anymore. I wasn't hovering at the edge of an old life, trying to make sense of its ending. I was here, living in it, reclaiming it, not just with ownership, but with presence, with roots. I finished the hedge, gathered the clippings, and walked them to the compost bin by the side gate. The sun was setting, warm light slanting across the yard. In the distance, someone was grilling. The air smelled like charcoal and spices and late summer.
I walked up the porch steps, hand brushing the new railings, paused at the top and looked out over the street. Everything looked the same, but I had changed. And maybe that's the only transformation that matters. A neighbor sees a woman in her yard and thinks she's new. And in a way, she's right. Because the girl who once stood here, suitcase in hand, heart splintered in silence, she's gone. What's left is someone who doesn't flinch anymore. Someone who doesn't ask to be let in. Because she holds the key. It rained the night I first slept soundly in the house. A steady, soaking rain. No thunder, no wind. Just water against the windows. Gentle and constant. Like a lullaby meant only for me. I lay in bed listening, eyes closed, covers pulled high. The room was warm. The air was clean. No creaking footsteps outside the door. No tension hiding in the corners. Just quiet. Not the silence of fear. The silence of peace. I had spent years running from this house, years defining myself by the absence it left behind. But here I was, back inside its walls, not haunted, not angry, whole. People think revenge is loud, explosive. A final confrontation where the villain is shamed and the hero walks away triumphant. But the real thing is softer than that. Real revenge is showing up whole in the exact place someone tried to break you. It's waking up to your own reflection and knowing it's no longer shaped by who left or who failed you. It's living well, fully, quietly. I made tea the next morning and stood by the kitchen window. The garden was damp, the soil dark and rich. I'd plant something there soon. Maybe herbs, maybe tomatoes. Something that would grow under my care, something with roots. The deed was still in the hallway. I passed it on my way to the front door, where the mail was already waiting. Just bills and circulars. Nothing urgent. Nothing that carried the weight of the past. I poured another cup of tea in and sat by the window, watching the world go on as it always did. Cars passed, dogs barked, the sky cleared. Somewhere he probably still tells himself his version of the story, that he did his best, that I was too sensitive, that it wasn't that bad. Let him. I no longer needed his recognition to validate my experience. I had the facts, I had the key, and I had this house, not as a monument to pain, but as a testament to return. I didn't win because I came back louder or stronger or more successful. I won because I came back with nothing left to prove. And that's the kind of victory that lasts. A quiet one. A steady one. The kind built brick by brick, choice by choice. The kind no one can take away.